really the first 4 to 5 years of business. It was very uncertain whether or not this was going to work. And I don't think I ever fully got to the point where I was ready to make a change, but I probably should have. If I'm giving myself that advice in hindsight, I was really stubborn, and I forced this to work because it had to. And part of the reason why it had to is I was so tied into it. My personality, my being, it was all very intertwined. So I couldn't let it fail.
Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast from. And if you can, do me a solid, drop a review. It would be greatly appreciated. Also, be sure to check out the show notes. There's a discount code for both Break Barriers and Audacious. Check it out when you get a chance. Really appreciate all the support there. Today's guest is Quincy Moore. He is the co-founder of New York or Nowhere. One of the cool things about this podcast is the community that we've built. And I actually met Quincy for the first time when I was at a Siegelman Stable pop-up over the holidays. And it was kind of a surreal moment because I was just purchasing some Siegelman Stable merch, and I was wearing my New York or Nowhere sweatshirt at the time. And I didn't know who Quincy was. And I kind of had this like very New York moment. So this is really, really cool. Thank you for hopping on today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You got it, man. As you probably could tell, I'm a big fan, and I wanted to show you this live on the podcast. I just purchased this for my daughter over here.
Hey, there it is. I love to see that.
The new drop over here.
Yeah.
I'm going to be having her rocking her new getup.
She's got the whole set. I love that. How old is your daughter?
She is 2. She's turning 2 in May.
Amazing. Yeah, my son's 2.5, so
yeah,
around the same age. Yeah.
So next time we're at the garden, we'll be rocking our gear.
Love that.
Yeah, man. And so after we met, I wanted to make sure that I did some homework here and learned a little bit about you and your story. And, what I love about a lot of these brands is like there's a lot of heart behind them. It's not just about going out there, putting together some merch and trying to make a profit. There's a backstory here. And so let's dive into that a little bit so we can give the audience some background as to who you are and how you got here. So why don't we go back to where things started for you? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was born in Western Mass and moved out to Santa Fe when I was 5 and lived there until college. So those were my early days.
Got it. Santa Fe. Tell us a little bit about what life is like out there.
Santa Fe was a weird place to grow up. I think I've come to appreciate it much more as an adult and getting to go there as a tourist and a visitor as opposed to sort of becoming of age there. Very small town. Great food, great culture. The aesthetics and the architecture are beautiful. It's kind of an amazing, unheralded town in the United States. Being there growing up, I didn't feel that way, but now obviously I do. So yeah, I mean, fairly normal upbringing. My mom raised me, my single mom. So that, there were obviously some challenges there, and played sports a lot growing up. I was a pretty average, normal kid.
Did you have any siblings?
I have a half brother. He's 8 years younger than me. So he grew up with my dad, and we become much closer later in life, but we didn't grow up together.
Got it.
Yeah.
And where was your dad, or where did he live at the time?
So my dad is in the Berkshires. He's in Western Mass. I don't know if you're familiar with like Great Barrington, Lenox area. So he's been there since the 80s. Grew up in Queens, was a classically trained ceramicist in this Japanese pottery form called bizenware. So he lived in New York for a long time and had a little gallery on Spring Street and West Broadway, which is kind of right around the corner from where I've made my life. And lived in Japan for many years and then ended up in the Berkshires.
Got it. And was there any connection between your father's roots out here and where you ended up?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, my grandparents immigrated to New York in 1950. And so I spent a lot of time here as a kid. Summers with my dad, just, coming and going to baseball games with my grandfather. He owned a clothing store in Queens for 40 years. And so I had this kind of deep connection to New York, and it represented, I think, home for me in a lot of ways, even though it wasn't where I grew up. And so after college, it just ended up being the place that I had to go and I had to be.
Where did you go to college?
I went to college in Colorado at Boulder, which has been having quite a moment with Mr. Sanders of late. So it's been cool to see you in popular culture in that way. Um, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you've seen, a couple different landscapes within the US geography, really like in terms of culture, right? When you think about Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then you think about college and at Boulder, and you think about life in New York here. I think that gives you just a very well-rounded perspective because a lot of times people never really leave where they came from, or even if they do, like you hear stories of people who grew up in the New York metro area, maybe went to school upstate but then kind of returned back to the New York metro area, or people who maybe leave the East Coast for the West Coast. But you've seen a couple different perspectives, which I'm sure has played a role in kind of helping you, not only shape yourself but what it is that you're building. So let's talk a little bit about life post college and the entrepreneurial journey. What did you major in? What did you want to do when you were in college?
I majored in journalism, so I fell in like writing was my first like creative love. Um, so I studied like editorial journalism, but this was 2007, 2008. So that was the moment kind of everything shifted from newspapers to blogs. And the curriculum at that point was actually like hilariously outdated. We had to do an internship my senior year, and they wouldn't let me write for a blog. I had to go and like cover high school sports for the local newspaper. So, I think I graduated with a degree that felt a little bit antiquated at the time. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to be in New York. That was kind of what was pulling me in this direction, but I didn't have a clear picture of what I was going to do when I got here. Um, so I moved to New York in 2010, and I started working for my cousin who owned like a novelties brand, basically like toys and other items that he had manufactured in China at mass market and sold them in the US to places like Bed Bath and Beyond and Toys R Us. And so I came here and started writing his blog because I needed something to do. And that kind of, I was employee one for them. And that transitioned into me sort of learning entrepreneurship, learning small business, learning manufacturing, import, export, sales, business development. And so that was the first 5 years of my career.
Did you like what you were seeing at that point? Was there any element of what you were seeing that was potentially either scaring you away from entrepreneurship or that was, making you question perhaps your degree at the time?
I mean, I definitely questioned my degree at the time. No, I think if anything, it pushed me deeper into the desire to want to be an entrepreneur. And my cousin Jason showed me that there is a way to do this for anybody that has the chutzpah and the desire and drive to do something on their own. So that was definitely like a catalyst for me at that stage of my life. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, but seeing him accomplish what he did kind of just proved to me that I could do it too.
I don't know if I wanna dig into that 5 years, but you mentioned you came from a family of entrepreneurs, and, as we can all say, we all know entrepreneurship isn't a smooth sailing ship. To that point, before you even, launched New York or Nowhere or Nolita, which we'll get into, um, what did you know about the darker side of entrepreneurship?
Nothing. I mean, obviously, like I saw my parents go through it, but I think they always tried to like shield us and me from the trials and tribulations of what they were doing. I wasn't with my dad as he was going through his journey, first as an artist and then as a restaurateur, so I didn't see like the struggle that I now know occurs more frequently than not. I think that ignorance was bliss in a way, though. I think it allowed me to go into it just with no fear of failure, which I think is the thing that prevents a lot of people from starting and from just diving into it. So I didn't have that. My amygdala was turned off, I guess, at that point in time, and I just went for it.
Got it. How much of your identity at that point in life was tied to your pursuit of a career, versus, who you were, outside of work? Like, was work really the big thing for you at that point in life?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was 100%, but it was pretty close.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so now walk me through what happened after those 5 years.
So at some point during those 5 years, I um, kind of just started like making things for myself, and I started making art prints. I'm sure that's part of the story that you've probably read, and just tinkering around, and I was still so inspired by New York, even though I was here. I didn't feel like I was in it, and I really wanted to be in it, and so I started making things, and putting them out with no intention other than seeing if there was other people that kind of felt the same way that I did or wanted similar things that I had in my brain. And so that was really like the genesis of it.
Got it. At that point, when it came to New York and the allure of New York, um, what really kind of me, I don't think shook is the right word, but really what really kind of stole the thunder in terms of where was your spirit, right? Was it the sports? Was it, just the bustling streets? Was it the fact that you can get anything you want whenever you want it? What about New York really kind of distinguished itself in your head at that time?
I mean, I think a lot of it goes back to like my grandparents coming here and starting their life here. And I think in a lot of ways, I felt like I was kind of doing the same thing at that point. I didn't have like a ton of direction. I didn't arrive in New York with any grand ideas of like what I wanted to do or who I wanted to become. I just knew that this was the place that I wanted to do it. And I think I had an idea of what I wanted my life to look at or look like rather. And it's I don't know if it was grandiose, but it was grand. I had ambitions and expectations for myself. And so I figured, I guess, why not do it in the hardest place to accomplish anything
I
on
love
earth?
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, the truth is if you make it here, you can make it anywhere, right?
that's right. Yeah,
That's the saying.
it is.
Um, and so, let's continue the journey here with regards to how we eventually got to build Nolita.
So first time I ever sold anything was 2012. They were prints with the names of all the streets on them in different neighborhoods, Nolita and Soho, West Village. So I made those. I figured out how to get them manufactured. Did a little photo shoot. Set up a website. Made a logo. Just kind of. And this would be even this. I think this was like right when Shopify had started, and so I had that resource, but it certainly wasn't as robust as it is now. So a lot of it was just trial and error, and I think I wanted to learn. I wanted to know how to be able to do it, whether it was for myself or for somebody else. Um, and so that was 2012. I spent 2 years kind of tinkering and making things and testing the waters. At some point during that time, I started making apparel as well. I started with art because it felt a little less saturated, and then transitioned naturally, I think, into apparel. Anything that you can print on was the canvas for sort of what I was doing. And then January 2015, I went full time on the brand that was known as Nolita, spelled with a K, named after the neighborhood where our store it still is. And yeah, that was the beginning of me jumping into something I had no idea what it would become or what it was going to take to get there.
Well, what would you say was your strength at the time? Whether it was a technical prowess or whether it was just your grit. What were you leaning into?
Certainly grit. I think taste was another thing. I think clearly my ideas have been validated over time. And I think ultimately that's what got me to this point, and that's what set me off on the journey that I was on. Is I had ideas that people embraced, and that spoke to them in like an intimate, real way.
I love that because where do you think that came from? Because you can't teach that, in my opinion, right? Like I I'm not a creative. I wish I was a creative. I'm a hard worker. I'm gritty. I can, put the time in. I can challenge myself. I could do hard things. But I think that's built on habit. Whereas I feel like that our artistic instinct, if you will, is something that really can't be taught. What were the major influences of that in your life?
I think my parents were huge in that. Both my mom has made art and been an artist in different disciplines and mediums for her entire life. So I watched her, do that from everything from sort of sewing to collage to painting. So I grew up around sort of the artistic spirit, and certainly my dad, influenced that as well. I think but I agree with you. It's not something that you can really teach. It has to be inside of you. And it wasn't something that going back to college, like writing was the first time that emerged from me. And that was the form that it took. And at the time, I didn't really know that was like coming from a place of creativity. I think it was just something that it was a skill that that it was something I was kind of good at, and I wanted to pursue it because I didn't want to go into economics or biology or anything like that. And so, um, but then yeah, it just kind of came out of nowhere. It came from a spark, and then that spark has just kind of like turned into a fire. And creativity is challenging at times, and I don't always enjoy having to be creative. And I think as this has the business has progressed, I've been able to sort of design my time and my life around the fact that I don't always have to kind of be on in that way, which has been really beneficial.
Yeah, no, I mean that's very well said, and it kind of makes me think, as someone who kind of leans into that thought process and has that creative muscle. How much of your success personally, take the brands away, but personally, how much of that success is dependent on validation? Because if you're an artist at heart, and you could be all kinds of different artists out there potentially listening to this, right? You may be creating something beautiful and wonderful, and something that you're looking at and kind of proud of. But a lot of times the world doesn't respond right away. Um, can you speak to that a little bit, whether it's to your own experience, whether it's to your parents' experience, what you've seen kind of out there? And I'm sure even in your own experience now, a lot of times you're probably creating new material, putting it out into the world, and some material gets better responses than others. But does that determine in your head whether or not you'd consider it to be successful?
Uh, Now it doesn't, but it certainly did before. I think until it got to a certain point where I still don't think that I've made it or that we've made it, but there was this moment that it shifted from like struggling to survive and struggle, even though people had embraced sort of the things that I was putting out there, it was really small scale. So those continue to push me forward. And it was important that I got the response that I did at the time, but it wasn't as meaningful, I guess, as it needed to be, um, in order for me to feel like, oh, this has been a massive success. So now it's like, you just picked up the kids line, and so that's something that we've been working on for 2 years, and I have a son, and so that really inspired us to bring that to life. And it didn't sell out on day one, and that's okay now. And our livelihood and the brand is not dependent on every single thing being a hit. I think for many years, I felt like everything that I put out needed to, crush it in order for it to be successful. And now I derive success at the macro and from different things.
What kind of advice would you give to someone who hasn't yet received that validation from the outside world, who continues to kind of push forward but is unsure, if it's worth it to keep going?
God, it's such a personal decision whether or not to keep going, isn't it? I think a lot of people on podcasts and in culture talk about just like screw it, just keep getting after it, keep going for it. Like something positive will happen, and to a certain extent, I do believe that and trust in that. But entrepreneurship is not a hard journey. So as I've met more and more people in my life, and even now having not necessarily being a mentor, but having younger people around me, I don't always encourage the path that I took. This is a really challenging path, and you got to have balls to see it through, or you have to embrace it for what it is. Maybe it's just a creative endeavor. Maybe it fulfills another part of yourself, not necessarily like your job, but your soul. And I think that's an important decision for someone to make at crossroads.
Did you ever have a period where you either almost quit, walked away, changed course?
Yeah, multiple times. I think the first 4 to 5 years of business, it was very uncertain whether or not this was going to work. And I don't think I ever fully got to the point where I was ready to make a change, but I probably should have. If I'm giving myself that advice in hindsight, I was really stubborn, and I forced this to work because it had to. And part of the reason why it had to is I was so tied into it. My personality, my being, it was all very intertwined. So I couldn't let it fail.
What were the people around you saying at the time? And we haven't even gotten to the point yet where you started New York or nowhere, and maybe we can go there or should go there.
Yeah.
But as you were kind of going down this route, what were the people around you saying? Because a lot of times I bring people on this show and we talk about similar experiences, and a lot of times the biggest question marks come from the people closest to you, mostly out of concern sometimes, but other times it's a projection of sorts. Did you have to deal with that at all?
Perception and reality are so different, and the struggles that I was going through, I didn't share with very many people. The people closest to me obviously knew the ups and downs and what I was facing on a day-to-day basis. But in New York, we have a lot of acquaintances, so there's like a larger network of people around me, and it was only ever encouragement. And even from my family, it was only really ever encouragement, which I'm lucky to have that. I'm just lucky to have their support, and so that meant a lot, and that, I'm sure, encouraged me to keep going at certain times. My now wife Sam, the moment where it was like that we're doing this or we're not really coincided with when we got engaged. And she's been a huge support system and catalyst for me as well, and just someone who, I think, believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. And that's hugely important, because we all, as creators, as business people, we all have moments of doubt in ourselves, and I think it's essential to have people in your life that help you to decide which path you're going to go down, for better or worse, and people that you can trust their opinion. And there were times when she said this should be it, and there were times that something happened and she was like, cool, let's keep going. So it was infinitely helpful for me to have someone like that to turn around to.
Absolutely. Is she involved in the business at all?
She is. So my wife is an entertainment lawyer. She works primarily in intellectual property, and so she does a lot of our deals still to this day. We have outside counsel, but you know, um, things move fast in a small business, and so she helps as much as she can.
Got it. Got it. For context, I want to kind of backtrack now a little bit, and make sure that we give the audience a little bit of insight into the inception point of New York or Nowhere. So let's go back and let's talk about how it all got started.
Yeah. So New York or Nowhere. The first time that those words were uttered was in 2015. I was working on. I don't know if you remember Spring. Do you know what Spring was? It was this like shopping app. It was supposed to be the Instagram for shopping, and all these brands
Yes,
at the time were on it, and it was kind of short lived. But at the time, it was like the coolest thing in the world, and it was very New York. It was very like the Arrivals, and I think this was pre-Away, but like all the cool brands were on Spring, and so obviously I wanted to be on Spring too. And my product was actually a good fit for it, just because of the demographic that was already built in. And so I made a connection with a woman named Diana Cohen, who went on to found Crown Affair, which is the incredible hair care brand that's crushing it all over the country and the world now. And so she brought me onto Spring and gave me a chance to like drop a little capsule collection and do some exclusive product. And during the creative sessions for that, I conceived New York or Nowhere. And it was initially just a graphic on a shirt. That's all it was. It was four words that kind of like that were almost the motto for Nolita, right? It was like I struggled at times to define what Nolita was, and New York or Nowhere kind of summed that up pretty succinctly. And so that was the first time it was ever produced, was in 2015, trademarked in 2015. And yeah, it's obviously come a long way since then.
at the time, did you have any idea what that statement meant to the masses, right? Because when I think about New York or Nowhere, I think about, you know, the New York City Marathon and the power unleashed during the marathon. I think about a New York sports team, riding high and carrying the city on their back. I also think about, let's take COVID for example, or a negative occurrence, and all of a sudden the resilience of New York kind of comes out, and after they dust themselves off, they think to themselves, it'll always be New York or Nowhere. And in my head, I kind of want to think back to who you were in 2015 when you came up with it. The tagline is obviously catchy. It makes a lot of sense. Uh, but did it ever cross your mind that it was a line that could really fit almost any situation, and it went to the heart and core of, you know, millions of people who live in the city?
I mean, I would be lying if I said yes. I didn't. And I think like the best things can't be manufactured in a lab, right? This motto, this slogan, this thing that makes people feel something and like reflects their emotion and their experience in the world with themselves in the city. Like you can't manufacture that, right? It had to inspire on its own. So no, I didn't. I thought it was catchy. I thought it was smart. That's why I trademarked it. That's why I got the digital IP from the Instagram handle to the domain. But at the time, there was no sense of like, okay, the brand is going to be New York or nowhere. This is the thing that's going to give me a career and build a life for my family. There was none of that. It was just another idea that I thought was cool at the time, and it's been the one that caught on.
Yeah, I mean that's incredible to just kind of think about the trajectory that it took. Um, came up with the idea. What spurred your marketing initiatives, and how did you go about that? I mean, one of the things that has stood out really about the brand is the fact that it's gotten in front of uh, a lot of popular names, a lot of popular organizations. You know, thinking of the Knicks and in the Garden in particular. Um, were you leading the marketing initiatives, or who was the brains behind that?
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess we'll get to 2020 at some point in this chat, but until then, it was basically just me. I mean, I had people that were around me and I hired friends and, made every mistake in the book when it comes to building a team, which like I had no idea how to do that. And like, if I'm being honest, I had no idea how to run a company or build a company. I was learning every single day and falling flat on my face constantly and forcing myself to get back up. Um, because I saw a path for this to become successful, but I knew it was going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort, especially with like the limited resources that I had, the skill set that was still developing at the time. No budget for marketing, no budget for influencers. It was all organic. It was all, and it's still to this day is pretty organic. Even we just started running our first paid ads like this month, so it's come a long way just off the back of what it is and the way that it speaks to people. But yeah, it was all just kind of coming from me at the time.
You know, you mentioned, learning along the way, which I think is just it's baptism by fire for most entrepreneurs. What were some of the bigger mistakes you think you made earlier on?
Paying other people before I paid myself was a big one. I think like, but I needed a support system. It's like I needed people to turn around to, and so I don't know that that was necessarily a mistake, but I think in some ways it made it harder to survive off of what I was building. Um, I in 2016, I decided I was going to release like a cut and sew clothing collection, which up until then it was all just graphic stuff, and that's what had worked for us. And the clothing line fulfilled some creative urge that I had, and that fell pretty flat on its face. I made like these beautiful linen joggers in Los Angeles and French terry shirts and bought expensive buttons and spent 6 months bringing and tens of thousands of dollars bringing this to life. Um, just to do it for myself, and that wasn't commercially successful. And so that, I guess it kind of reframed what I was building though, right? It showed me again that like, cool, these are the things that people are gravitating towards. You need to show restraint in how you proceed in order for this to become successful. And I think my biggest skill has become restraint. Even now, it's like the things that we release and the partnerships that we choose, and it's making those decisions correctly is challenging, and it's a skill in and of itself.
If you know me, you know that I like to look good and feel good. As an endurance athlete who trains daily, I need my wardrobe to fit the mold. Roan creates performance-driven clothing for your active lifestyle. Each piece is designed for versatility and made with integrity to outfit you for an active life lived on your own terms. The Roan promise is to help you move forever forward. Use code MILE40 for 20% off online and in-store for new customers only. Visit www.rhone.com, that's Rhone spelled RHONE, or find your local store and move forever forward starting today. When did this become like I don't know if the word story is right here, but when did it move from this really cool tagline that you trademarked into a story essentially, right? Like when I think about, and I'm not comparing you to any other brands, but I was listening to a podcast recently with Max, and he was speaking to Nick Barata about Siegelman Stable, and he talks about the importance of the fact that story was at the heart of the brand from the very beginning, right? And what I'm trying to kind of uncover here is with New York or Nowhere, when did it turn into the story element, right? In terms of carrying the weight that it carries now, not necessarily just in terms of sales, but even someone coming up to you and saying, like, this hits, like for one reason or another.
I mean, honestly, I think it was COVID. And again, I go back to like it can't be manufactured. This brand could have never been like created in a lab. And Max, what they built with Siegelman is incredible. I didn't have that. I didn't have that sort of like tight narrative to weave around it. Like New York is a big place. Everybody's experience with New York is different. But I think COVID unified us, right? And COVID was a moment where we like people needed a rallying cry. They needed something to remind them that like New York is still New York, even though it's not right now. And so I think that happened very naturally. And the work that I had put in prior to 2020 and the Knicks partnership and all that was great. And, to get some kid from Santa Fe, collaborating with the New York Knicks, some of my earliest memories are going to Knicks games with my dad and, in the 90s. And like, that's insane. It's insane that I got to do that. But it didn't make a successful business. That's for sure. It wasn't a real business at that point. There were moments where it almost was, but it never got there until after 2020. And COVID really catalyzed that.
You know what's cool about that is like I've been in the city now for 15 years almost, and I feel like I've known New York or Nowhere the entire 15 years, even though it wasn't really, to your point, it didn't really hit, according to you until 2020. Uh, but I feel like it's just a phrase that's been so ingrained in my head, and I think about different moments. I used to live down in Fidei when I first moved to the city, and so I didn't live too far away from the World Trade Center and the Freedom Tower. This was back in 2010, and I think about just kind of walking past it, and that phrase, it just kind of resonates with me when I think about, what I'm walking past, and, it wasn't even created back then. And so that's really, really cool. Talk to me about COVID with regards to how quickly kind of things came together and what that meant from you from a business perspective in terms of either having to scramble or, kind of having to, really lean into the narrative that was being built.
Yeah, I mean, I think 2018, 2019, we had gone into the Knicks and, but we didn't have a strong e-commerce business. I had no money for paid. Like, I think the brand was a cult brand. I think Nolita served its purpose and propelled the endeavor to where it is now. But right before COVID, I had reconnected with my old friend and now business partner, Liz Eswine, who in these channels is probably best known as New York City on Instagram. And we had just been friends through social circles in New York and always tiptoed around doing something together, obviously, because I had this IP that people seemed to like that was, perfect for her channel that she had yet to, really monetize in a product way. This was before creators all had brands, honestly. And so before COVID even started, we reconnected and had decided that, NYON was going to be a brand that we were going to work on together. And we were going to reframe the narrative around Nolita to something that was easier to explain and tell stories around and build story around. And then COVID hit and we had all the time in the world. We started really slowly. We test and learned, as Liz always likes to say. We released postcard sets and wallpapers and just released graphics with the logo on top of it on Instagram for people to share and feel something during that time. So before we even really like released another product in the New York or Nowhere under the New York or Nowhere brand, we were just again being that rallying cry for people. We lent ourselves as a phrase, an idea to the masses, and it was just really embraced. So then once we got to the point where we had a product to sell them, there was a lot of emotion around that, right? And like getting people to buy something based on the emotion or the feeling that it gives them is where the magic happens. Like that's impossible. That, you know, I don't know very many other brands that can say that they do that. And we've managed to, and I think that's ultimately why, you know, I'm bullish on NYON still to this day.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, as a customer and a fan, that's how it worked on my end. I mean, I've been a Knicks fan my entire life. Got season tickets a couple of years ago, so started going to the Knicks games. And I was walking through the shop, and you see everything there. You see the jerseys, you see all the merch, and then I saw the sweatshirt, and I was like, no, like this is what I want, because this speaks to me as someone who's been through the ups and downs of life in this city. And it wasn't just like a a cool piece of sports merch. It was something that was tugging at the heart. And now when I think about buying my daughter her piece, it's because I want her to carry that with her. She has no idea, obviously, but she, you know, in my mind, I'm like, you know, this is gonna mean something to me down the road, that she's repping this
Yeah,
phrase, you know, on her heart.
I love that.
Uh, because even if we don't, you know, stay here forever, this is where life started for her. And so kudos to you guys for instilling that, and not just me. I'm sure lots of people out there probably feel the same way.
Yeah, and that's it's so cool that they do. You know, that like people get New York or Nowhere tattoos and NYON tattoos constantly, and like I don't know that there's a greater compliment for a creative or a company than that. So you know, we've it means a lot to us that we've created something that means a lot to other people. And I think like going back to storytelling, we think that the brands we see the brand kind of as a character in everybody's story, right? Because New York means something different to everybody. You don't have to live here to love it here, right? You know, people in all over the world like are obsessed with this place and have a relationship with this place, and we let them borrow New York or Nowhere to kind of like describe how they're feeling about it. Yeah, I went on a tangent, but
No, 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 perfectly said. What have been you can name one if you just want to name one. Has there been any like surreal moment? I mean, you talk about the Knicks partnership, which, you know, I could probably talk to you about on an episode just all alone, just because I'm a big fan. But you can even say that's the one. But has there been any surreal connection to the brand, whether it be through an organization or through a certain person of influence, that when you saw them, you know, rocking the brand or reaching out to you, you were like, "This is pretty cool."
yeah, I mean, I can think of a bunch, but the two that stand out, the first is Sex and the City when they renewed it, and just like that came out, and I think in episode 5, Carrie Bradshaw, SJP was carrying a New York or Nowhere tote. Like that was incredibly surreal, just as someone who grew up watching that show, and like it is top 5 most iconic pieces of New York IP probably in history. So that was amazing, and then the number one though is Aaron Judge, who of the Yankees, obviously, um, who wore New York or Nowhere last year when there was a lot of questions about whether or not he was going to come back to the Yankees, and he wore that as a signal and a sign to people that he was, and I think that's probably the coolest thing that's ever happened, professionally. Just like him borrowing this as like a way to state his intention to people, even though maybe he was also kind of thinking messing with people, and we were praying at that time that like he wasn't messing with us, because if he wore it and then left, it might have like diluted it a little bit. But he stuck around and has been a great supporter of the brand in the same way that he supports Siegelman, and so that sticks
That's
out
pretty
for sure.
that's
Yeah,
pretty awesome. For
yeah.
for something like that, like did he reach out to you guys? Did his team reach out to you guys to get him whatever he was rocking?
No, the so our friends at the Knicks, one of them worked at MLB, and specifically at Legends, who they do all the retail at Yankee Stadium. And so she was like, "Hey, let's get Aaron some stuff." And so we sent a box over to the stadium, and a gentleman named Mike Laparo put it in put it in his locker, and he ended up wearing it. And then he and his wife have started buying stuff, which has been really cool for us too. And, these guys get given stuff constantly, as I'm sure I do too. Everybody does. And, the fact that he chose to wear it, especially at such a pivotal moment in his life, was pretty cool.
That's awesome. Talk to me about the intertwinement now of the New York City, um, different organizations, right? We talk about Siegelman Stable, and like there's this connection here, right? Like a lot of you guys are bouncing off each other, bouncing off each other's energy. You guys are lifting each other up, which is awesome to see. Not that you're direct competitors, but at the same time, it's just awesome to see good people leading organizations with generally positive missions, lifting each other up, and on top of that, being able to bring people of top influence into the sphere. Can you speak to what your community has done to help you throughout the last couple of years?
Yeah, I've been here for such a long. I think we've been here for around the same time, and like there's a camaraderie now that there wasn't before COVID, that there wasn't 10 years ago. I think there was the resounding feeling was a lot of competition, especially in like the fashion and lifestyle brand space. And I'm sure in parts of it there are, but with someone like Max and Caroline at Siegelman, like I love what those guys are doing so much. And I admire the effort that it takes to even get to where they are now. And I want to support them in whatever way that I can. I think we all just kind of like each other. And again, to your point, like it's not about competition. The world is big enough for a Siegelman Stable and a New Yorker Nowhere and a Kith and an ALD and whatever, right? It's the audience is vast. And so, rising tides, right? And I think, we've embraced that notion more than ever.
Absolutely. I mean, it definitely stands out to someone like me who has become a supporter of all you guys. It feels like there's an abundance out there. It's that abundance mindset, that everyone knows that we could all kind of succeed, independent and leave lots of people really happy in the process. Um, Over the last 4 years since COVID, how have things been? And talk to us a little bit about, what your vision is, for the near term.
I mean, things have been crazy. It was like all that hard work that I put in prior to 2020, like thank God I did, because I would not have I would not have been capable of navigating what we've navigated without having gone through that and like learned essentially how to like run a business. Because the business took off and then we actually really had to run it and it became an actual thing with payroll and health insurance and employees and cash flow issues. And we got into physical retail in 2021 and then permanently in 2022. And so that's been a whole learning curve as well, just in terms of New York real estate. And we have the bets that we're placing now are bigger than they ever were before. But it's so much more fun, and I have a great partner in Liz and a great team around us. And we have product market fit, which also really helps. It's like it's not screaming into a void. It's speaking to an audience, which like is invaluable.
When you see a company scale the way that New York or Nowhere has scaled, and you think about future outlook, um, do you find yourself dreaming bigger, or do you find yourself tempering expectations now that you've seen, a huge leap from where you started? How do you approach it just from a mindset perspective?
The former, for sure. The goalpost changed, right? Like our ambitions are greater than they ever have been. But now what's cool is that they're also more realistic, but like even from the outside, that people looking at what I had started 10 years ago could never have imagined that it would get to this point. And even now, people looking at us have no idea where it's going to get to. And that's cool. That's fine with us, right? We don't need that external validation to propel us forward at this point. The sky's the limit. We're really excited about what we're building, and I think we've just really scratched the surface, from a retail perspective, from an editorial perspective, partnership perspective. There are a lot of other New York sports teams that that we can go play around with, which is coming soon. I don't know when this is going to air, so I should probably watch what I say, but sports is a huge part of our strategy going forward. And it's exciting.
I love it, man. I'm always rooting for your continued success. My
Thank you.
last question to you as we kind of round things out here is the phrase New York or nowhere. What does it mean to you now, almost 10 years after you got that trademark?
I think it means pride for your place. I was proud to have made it to New York 10 years ago, and I'm proud to still be here at this point.
I love that. Couldn't have said it better. Quincy, thanks so much, man. Thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
With us. You got it.
I appreciate it. All right, thanks.